I was wondering if you could maybe speak to some of the lessons you've learned along the way of what communication looks like when you're communicating with community, especially, in the context of some of the bigger histories between science and Indigenous communities in Canada, and just some of the lessons you've learned along the way, and what some of the important facets for people to keep in mind are.
Oh yeah, it's certainly a complex topic, and it has multiple viewpoints to that. So I'll focus on a few. One is what it's not just general Indigenous community, but community itself. It's the communication aspect, and kind of as Steve pointed out as well, you have to kind of know kind of the audience and kind of go back and forth. But what I have learned more about this is actually, and this is part what I want to present here with the science communication skill workshop, is really the reflective piece. So communication is really a two-way street. It's not just like, hey, I or my researchers have done this in the lab, now you listen and just take it. Clearly there is this direction of information flow. But what I found more interesting is really the information flow backwards, in terms of what questions are the audience members asking. And clearly then it becomes interesting by really then saying, well, wait a second, if they asked this question, why did they ask that question? One could be that, oh, I've never really thought about that. Or we actually thought about it, but I just haven't really properly connected and properly disseminated that. Similar to what Steve then as well said, sometimes it's kind of these really cool things are not in the narrative, but really kind of outside the narrative and in non-chronological order, that you will find, and recognizing all that is really important. And so that's, I think, my biggest takeaway there is listen to the audience, listen to kind of their feedback, and then adopt that approach, because we get obsessed by details, because that's by our nature. We need to find things and whatever, but then the bigger pictures are really important. And so let's not lose the forest for all the trees. And so that's very interesting. What we in this particular grant project that we're doing, and I have to say this is because of Duma. So I was associated with him because he was kind of with the community there. But it's listening to the stories, to the elders, and then translating that into research. So one big aspect was this birch bark oil, musqueomin, is made in a campfire process. What is the process? What's going on? And by listening to the stories, we can kind of learn and translate that back. And I think, and this is kind of the second way of kind of that two-way street of communication, is by really kind of learning what's there. And it's really kind of an active back and forth. We call it awakening of the knowledge, and it's really wonderful in that way, because the knowledge grows in layers, and I have learned a lot about that too.
Yeah, I love that emphasis on the two-way street, and I'm thinking in particular about the issues that Kimberly's raising, that if your project was so enriched by what you heard back from an audience that you had to reach out to in a specific way, who are we losing when we're not being accessible in our general communication? That feedback you guys got is so important. So another sort of impetus to making work accessible, making communication accessible, is that we don't want to miss any input from any communities, by virtue of a way that we've locked them out because of poor communication, poor accessibility.
Yeah, and then also like simply, kind of from a science perspective, I heard it a lot when we talk to a general audience. People use the term, dumbing down or generalizing. And that's such a poor choice of word, kind of, because it's not the way. It's a different way to communicate it. It's kind of putting it really in, it's not a dumb or smart thing what someone does in a lab or, you know, kind of there. It's really the level of detail. And so it comes back to the question there. Clearly, non-experts, you know, if I talk, you know, to non-experts, they don't understand, you know, what solvent are we using, and they don't really care, you know,
Yeah.
because it's not relevant. Clearly, for the experiments, it's relevant because
Yeah.
if I use acetone or ethanol, it really makes a difference.
Yeah.
But what the gist is really by saying we find a certain process and we use certain techniques. And then we need to explain why do we use one over the other, and bringing that back into a story is really good. And coming back as well from kind of the overall thing with regards to your initial question about, you know, working with indigenous communities.
Mm-hmm.
What I have learned, I mean, this is, you know, what I have learned there is a lot of thing with the Mi'kmaq community is it's about stories, and really that's, it's not only particular to the Mi'kmaq people, but it's really kind of very human. It's all about the story.
That's right.
And, you know, a research text is a story, you know, kind of, it has a beginning, it has a middle part, it has an end. And so linking all this together is really relevant. And that's what is enriching.